This is a story I haven't let myself think about in a long time, and for good reason. My friends and I used to be obsessed with urban exploration. Growing up in upstate New York, there were more than enough decaying relics of the industrial age within driving distance to keep us occupied for entire weekends. Looking back, most of what we did wasn't even that impressive, just rotting warehouses and empty silos. But every so often, we'd find a place that felt different. One spot that had been on our radar for months was the old Waverly Textile Mill. It was a massive brick complex about 40 minutes from our hometown. I won't give the exact coordinates, but anyone into the East Coast exploration scene probably knows the one. We'd seen enough blurry photos on forums to decide it was finally time to see it for ourselves. It was late August, that humid part of the summer where you're bored of the local parks and driving aimlessly through the suburbs. Silas was the one who finally suggested we just go. There were 4 of us that night: me, Silas, Marcus, and Jax. Marcus and I were into street art at the time, so we'd packed a few cans of high-pressure paint. The rest of my bag was stuffed with some industrial-grade Roman candles I had left over from a camping trip. Our routine was always the same: find a way in, get to the highest point of the building, mess around for an hour, and get out before anyone noticed our flashlights. This night was supposed to be no different. Silas was driving. He pulled onto a gravel service road a few blocks from the mill's perimeter, and we hiked the rest of the way. We were bracing ourselves to climb a 10-foot chain-link fence, but to our surprise, a massive section of it had already been peeled back. It felt like an invitation. The mill was gargantuan, easily 3 times the size of the photos we'd seen. Exploring the whole thing would have taken days, which, at the time, we thought was great. We were always looking for a place we couldn't get bored of. Silas led us through a shattered loading bay door. Even with our high-end flashlights, the interior was suffocating. Imagine the most hollow, silent place you've ever been. Every floor was stripped to the concrete, lined with rusted looms and hanging electrical conduits that looked like dead vines. We eventually found ourselves in a long, central corridor. We clicked on our super lights, these high-lumen tactical torches we were all weirdly proud of. Mine could light up a football field, and if you looked directly at the beam, you'd be seeing spots for 10 minutes. The walls were layered with years of graffiti. Some of it was genuinely talented work, but most was just garbage tags. Marcus and I found an untouched white wall in what looked like an old foreman's office on the 3rd floor. We decided to stop there to work on a piece, while Silas and Jax said they wanted to keep pushing upward to find a route to the rooftop water tower. They disappeared into the dark of the stairwell, their footsteps echoing until they faded out completely. Marcus and I finished our piece about 20 minutes later. I stepped out into the hallway to look at some of the older tags while Marcus stayed behind to pack the cans. After a few minutes of standing there in the silence, I heard Marcus yell from inside the office. He sounded pissed. He asked if I was screwing with him. I told him I hadn't moved from the hall. He stepped out looking genuinely angry and said, "Quit the act, man. I know you took my bag." I swore I hadn't touched it. I'd been in his line of sight nearly the whole time. He went quiet for a second, then muttered that Jax must have doubled back to prank him. To be fair, that was exactly the kind of thing Jax would do. We did a quick sweep of the room with our lights, but it was gone. His entire backpack, paint, phone, keys, was just vanished. We couldn't do any more tagging without the supplies, so we decided to head up and find the other guys. We climbed the next 2 flights of stairs, but they didn't lead to the roof. They ended in a heavy, reinforced door that was welded shut. We wandered that floor aimlessly for a bit, trying to find another staircase. That's when I walked into a small side utility room and froze. On the far wall was a massive geometric sun symbol, painted in deep black. It looked like the ones we'd seen on the lower floors, except for one thing. This one was wet. I could see the paint literally dripping down the brick in the beam of my light. And there, sitting right in the center of the room on the floor, was Marcus's bag. Marcus stepped in behind me. He didn't even hesitate. He lunged for the bag, grabbed it, and hissed, "What the hell is wrong with them?" I didn't answer. Even for Jax, this felt wrong. The timing didn't work. They would have had to slip past us in a dead silent hallway without us seeing a single flicker of their flashlights. We left the room and started walking down the nearest corridor, not even talking anymore, just wanting to find the exit. Suddenly, the sound of heavy, frantic boots thundered from around the corner. It was Silas and Jax. They weren't laughing. They were sprinting. Silas didn't even stop to explain. He just grabbed my arm as he flew past and gasped, "Run. Now." I've learned one rule in life. If someone you trust tells you to run in a place like that, you don't ask why. You just move. As we bolted down the stairs, Silas tried to explain what happened, but between the echoes and the wind, I could only catch fragments. Something about people. Multiple people. The mill felt like a labyrinth now. Every turn looked the same, and the exit we'd come in through seemed to have moved. We eventually stopped in a far wing of the building just to catch our breath. We all agreed that if we found any stairwell and just kept going down, we'd eventually hit the ground floor. We moved like ghosts. Slow, quiet, flashlights dimmed. We reached what we thought was the basement level and started scouting for the loading bay. Then a noise cut through the dark. It was a sharp, rhythmic clicking sound, like someone striking two heavy stones together. The four of us stood paralyzed. We were praying that whoever was down there hadn't seen our lights. But as we began to slowly back away into the shadows, a voice, low, gravelly, and terrifyingly calm, drifted out of the darkness ahead of us. He said, "Word for word, I should have finished it while you were upstairs." We didn't wait for a second sentence. We turned and hit a full tilt sprint. This time I could hear them. Not just one person, but several sets of heavy footsteps pounding the concrete behind us. They were screaming obscenities, telling us they had the gates blocked, that we weren't leaving the property. It was the most visceral terror I've ever felt. We were running blind until Silas, by some miracle, recognized a specific piece of graffiti near the loading bay door. We burst through the entrance, scrambled through the gap in the fence, and didn't stop until we reached the car. Silas peeled out of there so fast the tires kicked up a cloud of gravel that hit the mill's siding like gunfire. As we drove, Jax finally told us what they saw. When they'd gone down to the lower levels to find us, they heard a metallic clinking from one of the old machine rooms. They thought it was us. They walked in and saw 3 figures in heavy dark coats sitting in a circle on the floor. They weren't talking. They were hunched over, moving small glass marbles or stones around in some kind of ritualistic game. The second those figures noticed Jax's light, they didn't scream or run. They just stood up in perfect unison and started hunting. There are so many things that don't make sense. Why steal the bag just to leave it under a fresh painting? Why the stones? Silas thinks it was some kind of cult. Jax thinks they were just dangerous people who had claimed the building and wanted to toy with us before closing the trap. I don't know the answer, and I don't want to. To this day, that mill is still standing. But I haven't been back to that part of the state since. This happened a little over 4 years ago. I had just moved into my first real house, a place I definitely don't live in anymore. At the time, I was coming off a brutal 3-year stretch living in a cramped, noisy apartment in downtown Portland. The location was convenient, but I had grown so tired of the constant sirens, the shouting on the sidewalks, and the thin walls that let me hear every word of my neighbors' arguments. I wasn't a kid anymore, and I was desperate for some actual silence. The place I ended up renting was a small, cedar-sided house on the edge of the high desert, tucked behind a thicket of ponderosa pines with a long, winding gravel driveway. There isn't much else to say about the house itself. It was basic. 2 small bedrooms, an old kitchen with linoleum floors, and a bathroom that always smelled like well water. But it was quiet. My nearest neighbors were a quarter-mile down the road, Cizir completely out of sight and well out of earshot. Finding a job out there was a struggle, but I eventually landed a position doing remote data entry that kept me on my computer for 10 hours a day. Between the long shifts and the general exhaustion of moving, I didn't have much of a routine. I mostly lived off takeout and kept to myself. I had no social life to speak of, which, honestly, suited me just fine. This particular night happened in late October. I had just finished a grueling shift around 9:45 p.m. It was one of those mentally draining days where your brain's like it's operating on 5% battery and all you want is a hot meal and a dark room. I kicked off my boots, changed into a hoodie, and called in an order for Thai food from a local spot I'd used a few times before. There weren't any delivery apps like DoorDash that serviced my area back then, so your options were limited to the 3 or 4 places willing to drive out into the pines. It was just after 10:10 p.m. when the doorbell rang. I remember thinking, damn, that was fast. Usually it took them at least 40 minutes to reach my gate. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. There was a guy standing there wearing a dark hoodie and work boots, his hands buried deep in his pockets. But he didn't have any food with him. No bag, no thermal carrier, no receipt. Nothing that even remotely signaled he was a delivery driver. I should have realized something was wrong immediately, but my brain was sluggish from work and I wasn't thinking straight. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open a few inches, keeping the security chain on. I asked him if he had the order. He paused for a long 3 seconds, then nodded slowly. He muttered something about needing to double-check the address on the slip in his truck before grabbing the bag. That's when the adrenaline finally hit me. My exhaustion vanished. I looked past him toward the driveway, but I couldn't see a car, just the dark wall of pines. I told him flat out that if he didn't have the food in his hand right now, I was calling the police. He didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. He just whispered something under his breath, turned around, and walked down the gravel driveway until the darkness swallowed him. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I shut the heavy deadbolt and went to the kitchen. I wanted to call the restaurant, but I talked myself out of it, thinking maybe he was just a new driver who was lost and confused. 20 minutes later, a completely different car pulled up. It was the actual delivery guy. I took the food, tipped him well, and tried to put the first encounter out of my mind. Around 11:30 p.m., I was in the living room, watching a movie with the lights off, trying to unwind. That's when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound coming from the back of the house. I muted the TV and froze. I sat in total silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then, I heard it again. It was coming from the sliding glass door in the kitchen. I stared down the dark hallway toward the kitchen, and to my absolute horror, I saw the silhouette of the back doorknob slowly, methodically jiggling. Someone was testing the lock. Without a second thought, I grabbed my phone and retreated into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I called 911 in a whisper and told the dispatcher someone was trying to force entry into my house. I grabbed a heavy kitchen knife I kept on my nightstand and waited. It took 15 agonizing minutes for a cruiser to arrive. When the officer finally knocked on my front door, I ran to let him in. The police did a full sweep of my property and the surrounding woods. No one was there. However, when the officer led me to the back door, he pointed his flashlight at the frame. There were fresh, deep pry marks in the wood right next to the latch. It looked like someone had been trying to wedge a flathead screwdriver or a small crowbar into the gap to pop the lock. I gave them my statement and told them about the delivery guy from earlier. They told me they'd keep a patrol car in the area for the night, but since nothing had actually been stolen and no one was caught, there wasn't much else they could do. I didn't sleep a wink that night, or the night after. 3 days later, I got a call from the local precinct. They had detained a man 3 miles away after a neighbor caught him crawling through a basement window. When they showed me his mugshot, I felt the blood drain from my face. It was him, the guy from my porch. The officers told me he had a history of targeted break-ins and that he usually spent days watching a house to learn the occupant's schedule before making a move. The false delivery had been his way of checking if I was home alone and how I'd react to a stranger. I moved out of that house 2 weeks later. I lost my security deposit and had to crash on a friend's couch for a month, but I didn't care. I realized that living in isolation sounds like a dream until you realize that when you scream for help, the only things listening are the trees. This happened just a few months ago, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. My name is Maya, and I'm a 24-year-old medical resident at Northwestern. For anyone who doesn't know, the first year of residency is a living nightmare. I don't think I saw more than 5 hours of sleep a night for 6 months straight. So when my schedule finally opened up for a long weekend in July, I promised myself I'd actually have a life. That meant going out, meeting people, and trying to forget about hospital charts for 48 hours. I was staying with my friend Chloe, who lived in a busy part of Wicker Park. Chicago is great in the summer, and we ended up at this dimly lit industrial-style bar that's always packed on Saturday nights. This is going to sound bad, but I have this habit of pretending to be a bit airheaded when I meet guys at bars. It's not over the top, just enough to let them assume I'm not really paying attention. I'm not a genius, but I'm definitely observant, and for some reason, pretending to be a little slow is a great way to see a person's real character. Most guys assume every girl they talk to is easy to manipulate. I find it satisfying to flip the script once I get bored. Chloe and I had just ordered our first round when these two guys, Julian and Elias, slid into conversation with us. They seemed perfectly normal, decently dressed, confident, no immediate red flags. Chloe seemed to hit it off with Elias almost instantly, so I figured I'd stick it out and talk to Julian. He was actually pretty charming. We ended up talking to them for a long time, which was unusual for us. Usually these bar encounters fizzle out after 10 minutes. At one point, Chloe leaned over and whispered that she needed to find the restroom. As we were walking away, Julian asked if we wanted another round. I told him we'd both have a gin and tonic, a standard drink that's hard to mess up. While we were in the restroom, Chloe admitted she was actually considering going home with Elias. I was surprised. Chloe isn't usually the one to make spontaneous moves like that, but she kept telling me how special he seemed. I just shrugged. I wasn't particularly invested either way, so I told her I'd go with the flow. When we returned from the bathroom, I spotted the guys across the bar. They didn't see us yet. Interestingly, they weren't laughing or talking anymore. They were just standing there with totally blank, focused faces. As we got closer, I noticed they were whispering intensely to each other. That tiny shift in energy gave me a heavy, sinking feeling in my gut. The second we were within earshot, the energy shifted again. They both snapped right back into the fun, casual vibe they'd been sporting all night. Julian pushed 2 glasses toward us without saying much. I looked down. There were 4 drinks on the ledge, 2 gin and tonics for us, and 2 vibrant, neon blue frozen drinks for them. I didn't know exactly what they were, but they looked like something a tourist would order at a beach resort. Definitely not what these 2 guys had been drinking earlier. I decided to test them. With the most innocent, ditzy smile I could manage, I pointed at their blue drinks and said, "Oh my God, those look so much better than ours. I'm so jealous. I bet you guys are too tough to drink something that looks that girly, right?" Before they could respond, I reached out and playfully slid our gin and tonics over to them and pulled the blue frozen drinks toward Chloe and me. I gave Julian a little wink. Chloe caught on to the weirdness and grabbed the drink I pushed toward her, looking at me with total confusion, but she played along. Julian stared at me for a long, silent second. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the charming mask slipped completely. He looked like he was sizing me up, trying to figure out if I was joking or if I actually knew something. Then he forced a laugh and said, "Touch." He picked up the gin and tonic I had originally ordered and started sipping it. Elias followed suit. That actually put me at ease for a moment. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. We finished the drinks without any further issues. By that point, it was nearly 1:30 a.m. Elias suggested we all go back to his place for a nightcap. He lived in a modern apartment complex just a few blocks away. When we got inside, the place was strangely empty. It was clean, but there was almost no furniture or decor, just a couch, a TV, and a few boxes. It looked like someone had either just moved in or was getting ready to leave in a hurry. Elias grabbed some seltzers from the fridge, and we sat in the living room for a bit. Everything seemed normal until about 15 minutes later. The guys started getting quiet. Julian's head started lurching forward, and Elias began slurring his words so badly I couldn't understand a single syllable. Then, just like that, the two of them fell dead asleep on the couch within minutes of each other. It was a terrifying sight. They didn't just drift off, they collapsed. My suspicion was proven right in the most graphic way possible. They had clearly put something in our gin and tonics, assuming they'd be the ones drinking the blue distraction drinks. Chloe was still a little buzzed and didn't fully grasp what was happening until I grabbed her arm and pulled her into the hallway. I whispered what I had done at the bar and told her we had to leave now. She looked at the two unconscious men, then at me, and the color drained from her face. She just kept saying, "Oh my God," over and over. We didn't call the police that night. We were in shock, and honestly, we didn't have any physical evidence other than two guys passed out in their own home. We just ran. We didn't stop until we were back at Chloe's place with the door triple locked. The part that still haunts me is the why. Why would they agree to bring us back to their place if they knew they were going to pass out? I realized later that they probably thought the dose would take longer to kick in, or that they were physically large enough to fight through the effects, while we, being smaller, would have been completely incapacitated. They were predators who had done this before, but they had underestimated the potency of their own poison. I don't go to that bar anymore, and I never ever let someone else hold my drink.